Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We'll learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We'll also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. In this episode, we have got Prashant Natarajan. Prashant is a technology and product executive with expertise in data, analytics, and machine learning application. He has served at Deloitte, HTO.ai, and Oracle, as well as Siemens in USA, and has worked in Australia, Europe, and Asia Pacific. In this episode, we talk about how the product innovation in the data analytics space and how the newcomer are challenging the powerhouse in the industry. Prashant will also share a little bit give us a little bit of a sneak peek of his new upcoming book. I trust you will enjoy this podcast interview. Thank you. Hey, Prashant, and welcome to the Analytics. So I am so thrilled to have you on the guest for this episode. How are you doing?
Hi, Jason. Thank you very much for having me as a guest. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm honored to be talking with you.
Second off, I'd like to say welcome to Australia. So how are you finding the lifestyle here in Melbourne so far compared to the States?
Well, I cannot say anything but the nicest things about Melbourne. It has been consistently rated the most livable city in the world for 5 out of the last 6 years. And having lived here for slightly more than a year, I completely appreciate and agree with that rating.
Great. So what made you decide to come and relocate to Australia?
So I think there's a couple of things over here. One is I have been doing work with Australian clients, even when I was in the United States, in the global role that I was doing at both Oracle and at H2O.ai, where I spent about 11 years in both of these companies in my last 2 roles. And before that, other global roles. So Australia has always been a familiar market for me in terms of customers and clients and people I've worked with, but I have never been working in Australia for any appreciable length of time. And while my kids were still young, I wanted to take this opportunity to come and visit this beautiful country and work here for some time, which is what I've been doing for the last 14 months or so.
In terms of the working style, would you say that is any major difference between Australia and United States, even though both developed countries both share a lot of the common value? But what about the working style?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jason. They do share a lot of common values. They are both allies. They are Western countries with a very high standard of living. And the one thing that was very obvious to me when I first came here was the similarity in the number of brands that you see where you do your shopping, you go out. For example, there's the 7-Elevens, the Targets, the Kmarts, the Subways, the Meccas or the McDonald's, as we call them back in the States. And so from that perspective, I felt that in several ways, from a lifestyle perspective and from a shopping business perspective, there were lots of similarities. So I kind of felt at home right away to start with. But then also to your point about the differences, I think coming from the Silicon Valley, where I spent the last 10 to 12 years before I came here, and the United States, I would say that the line between work and life is more demarcated over here in Australia. Australians like to take their work-life separation much more seriously, whereas in the Americas, while people still do enjoy their life and they give a lot of time to their families and friends and American football, basketball, and baseball. Americans probably work longer hours and for more days in a week than what I've seen here in Australia. That's not a value judgment of whether one is better or not. It's just what I saw as being something that I both enjoyed on one hand, but to be very honest, also took a lot of time getting used to on the other.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no right or wrong in terms of the answer for this one. And even taking that perspective and observing what is happening in other countries like Japan, Singapore, or China, the hours are even longer. So it will be interesting to see how that different culture are playing in terms of the work-life balance and also the working hours. Now, I do want to ask you a little bit more about your current work. So, in your current role, do you focus on any particular vertical or sector for the works that you do in Australia?
Not really. My focus is on data analytics and artificial intelligence. And the role I currently play is as principal of analytics and artificial intelligence at Deloitte Consulting based out of Melbourne, but I do have a national role in that I do quite a bit of work also in other states and other cities here in Australia. And while I have some preferred verticals, the role itself doesn't slot me into a specific vertical. It's more of a horizontal role that looks at how our clients can leverage advanced analytics and AI across whatever industry they are in. In specific to the industry focus, I personally focus more on the financial services industry, banking, insurance, and also healthcare and manufacturing in the private sector, and do some work with government in the public sector.
Yeah, from my research is healthcare has been a major part of your career. And I do think that a lot of the analytics that we do in one industry often can be transferred to another industry. And sometimes it would be giving surprising result because just looking at the analytic from a different lens. Now, that being said, in your opinion, what is the one thing that the other sector could learn from the healthcare sector when it comes to analytic and AI?
So I would say the one of the things that other sectors could definitely learn from health and life sciences arena is a focus on interpretability and explainability. Because while I have also done work in banking and manufacturing, often in these industries, yes, the cost of getting a wrong analytical insight or applying the analytical insight wrongly can lead to negative effects and negative consequences. In the health and life sciences arena, those negative effects or consequences typically result in either a person's health going from good to bad to worse, or in really bad scenarios, it could mean somebody dying. So in health and life sciences, not applying analytics in a transparent way or in an appropriate way is literally a matter of life and death, which it is not in most other industries. So the need for interpretability, understanding what data was used, how it was used, how the model was created, and how the scoring pipeline was created out of that in as transparent, open way as possible to maximize the lineage of a decision starting from data is probably the single most important insight that we can pick from the health and life sciences arena in other industries.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I suppose on the other side of the token, because we are dealing with the personal health of the individual that often could result in life or death, we just have to be more sensitive to the human side and cannot always justify everything based on the metrics. However, this in turn has resulted in the slower adoption of the technology and analytic in this space. So my question for you then is, how would you convince people not to be afraid of AI in dealing with their healthcare?
Um, I don't think people are necessarily afraid of AI in healthcare. If you kind of see, my book or some of the other books that have come out or some of the conversations that are happening, next week I'll be doing the opening keynote at the Health Data and Analytics Conference in Sydney. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about over there is the global revolution in the use of AI in all aspects of health. Now, when we look at health, typically people think of the doctor, they think of the nurse, they think of hospitals and clinics. But if you look at healthcare as a whole, there is more non-clinical data in healthcare than there is clinical data. There is as much financial data in the health setting as there is clinical data. For example, there is the procurement process by which drugs and products get into the healthcare facility, all the way from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the distributor, retailer, and then inside a healthcare facility, all the way up to the bed. Those are pretty complex supply chains. And the healthcare supply chain is as complex or more complex with more hands touching it than your average retail supply chain, frankly. And in the same way, if you take a look at the financial aspect of it, with so many players involved in the financial workflow, whether it is governments, for example, whether in Australia it is through the public health system, or in the United States it's through Medicare or Medicaid, or even China for that matter, through what the Chinese government is doing in terms of improving access, telemedicine, and so on and so forth. There's multiple aspects of financial responsibility that come in, whether it's the government that's paying for public health or partly paying for a patient's visit, or it's the private health insurer or the insurance company that is involved in it, whether it's dental or vision, and then finally what the patient also pays. So unlike most other sectors where the lines are pretty clearly drawn in terms of what a supply chain looks like or what a financial transaction looks like, in health and life sciences, it's pretty complex. And so the reason I say that is not that health organizations are not willing to or hesitant. It's just that the constituent workflows and the value determination are much more complex than other industries. Now, I'm not saying that the other industries have it easy, but I think because of this interesting mix of public-private partnerships that characterize health and life sciences across the globe, it tends to be more complex. And as a result, there are more stakeholders, and there is a need for more buy-in, and there is a need to keep more people happy and satisfied. And as you and I both know, Jason, the more stakeholders you have in any system, the longer it takes to gain consensus and the longer it takes to even come to a common understanding of what value means. Which is why I think in the health setting, you sometimes see technology innovation take a slower route to market than you see in other industries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, especially that there are just multiple parties coming involved. Things will always get slow. What do you think the role of the digital transformation could play in the healthcare? And in my opinion, I think digital transformation will play a massive role in terms of the analytic. But before we go on and linking those two together, I'm interested to hear your view about the digital transformation in the healthcare industry.
Again, I would basically separate. I don't think the answer is a healthcare answer over here. So, if I may, I would like to take your question and break it down into more of business areas, if I can call it that. As I just mentioned, healthcare is the clinical aspect of healthcare is one part of healthcare. There are other aspects of it. So if we kind of take a look at your average enterprise in terms of whether it's energy or utilities or manufacturing, else, including health, by the way, I would say that the supply chain, financial management, regulatory compliance, and reporting being the second, supply chain being the first, the customer experience being the third, and the employee talent experience being the fourth, and then marketing, business development, and sales being the fifth. So, if we kind of break down business transformation and digital transformation into these five areas, namely the supply chain aspect of it, the financial aspect of it, the human resources, employee experience aspect of it, customer experience, and then finally sales, marketing, and business development. I think we are at this point where data, analytics, the cloud are all coming together in a very impactful way that we have not seen even in the last 40 to 50 years of information technology. Computing, storage, and the ability to spin up environments and the ability to train people quickly without having to set up large teams, without buying your own servers, without setting up massive data centers, without getting into vendor lock-in and license lock-in on software or hardware is truly becoming a liberatory experience for each of these five business areas. So I think the cloud itself has had, is having, and will continue to have a tremendous impact on the ability of organizations to transform these five pillars of your average business in a faster way, in a more optimal way, and in a cheaper way than certainly 5 or 10 years ago. Then what the cloud also does is, in addition to these advantages, it also provides the ability for us, and I know we'll get to this next, it also provides us for an ability to break down data silos and along with that organizational and department silos in ways that we haven't been able to easily do in the past because of competing technologies, because of different databases, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the second aspect of it, which is the secondary uses of data, which are the primary use being the actual creation of the data through a transaction system or through a user entering their data or capturing someone's behavior or conversations and using that data for secondary uses through analytics, through actionable workflows and personalization is also becoming easier with the cloud than it was before. And I've seen a couple of examples of this in the banking space, especially also with conversational AI, very clearly where the cloud has made a big difference. So the combination of the cloud, the combination of data, and finally data science, machine, and deep learning is bringing new ways of bringing about innovation and digital business transformation for each of these five pillars that we could have only dreamt about 10 years ago.
I agree. And I really think that the digital transformation will further amplify the use of analytics because it allows business to create and collect the data that is not possible before. And I think ride sharing is a great example because of the way how and we order taxi and how and we ride the taxi. And now everything is recorded in the database. That whole process is recorded in and can consume in a digital way. And that is pretty much like a Pandora box that opened up a lot of possibility and what I call to embed the analytics into the business operation and drive the performance of the business. And that was never possible before the pre-Uber days. So that being said, how do you explain to the enterprise client that before they go on and set up the data science capability, before they go on, they should look at how do they transform their business into digital transformation, because that will actually just open up all the possibility. And these two, the digital transformation and the business analytic, will go hand in hand.
Jason, I think the question you just asked now is a very important question for organizations and businesses. The need to use technology is not the end state, it's a means to the end. And what I mean by that is whatever technology we are using, whether it's the cloud or it's CRM or data or analytics and so on and so forth, it has to result in meeting a strategic need for the business, an operational need, or a tactical need. And those needs can be across both. It could be, how do I meet the mission statement that my organization has set for itself? How do I become the number one player in my sector instead of the number two? Or how do I move up 3 rungs up the ladder? It can also be something that is specific to a business process or a business function, or something in customer satisfaction. How do I increase my customer satisfaction score? How do I create more engaged and happier customers? How do I identify new markets? So the first step in any process of using technology to drive business transformation using digital technologies is first identifying the need or the problem that a business wants to solve. Number one, selecting the right people or the teams in order to solve that. And typically, that should be a combination of people who understand the business, people who understand the domain, and people who understand the technology. It'll be great if we can get 1 or 2 people who wear both hats, a business and a technology hat. Someone, I would consider put myself in that role. For example, a translator who can help business and technology work more efficiently and better with each other. But I come strongly from the school of thought that identifying the business problem, building the right team around it, and then selecting the appropriate technology is the order in which we go about digital transformation for a business.
Yeah, that is a great answer. I think that is a great advice for any of the enterprise. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about your former career in Oracle and also H2O.ai. The reason why I'm really interested about that is it's probably great to hear your perspective to come from that product development side of the world, as you spent 10 years in product management and the development side. So the question for you today is, how much of the new entry are you seeing in this space of people building new analytical product and platform for the world? I mean, apart from the Oracle, Microsoft, all those people, but how much of the new entrants are you seeing?
Can you repeat that last part, Jason? Sorry, how much of what do I see?
How much of the new entrants are you seeing in this space, like the company of H2O or Data Robot, or this new company? Do you see a lot of them coming up in United States?
That's as you pointed out correctly, Jason. In my experience, product management, product strategy, and product development is something I've been doing for at least half of my career. And it's something that I am very passionate about. So I would like to go back maybe 15 years, chronologically speaking, compared to where we are today. So if we go back to 2003, 2004, I would say that specifically from a data and analytics perspective, that was about the time when business intelligence started really picking up steam and becoming more and more popular. It was when you saw companies such as MicroStrategy and Business Objects, Siebel Analytics, Cognos, and so many other players start coming into the market. Around the early 2000s was when we saw a change happening from operational reporting and old school traditional reporting, literally electronic equivalents of paper reports. I think the early 2000s was the time, early to mid 2000s was the time when we started that shift happening. The shift happening from traditional reporting to more business intelligence, dashboards, scorecards, and so on and so forth. More of a visualization provided by several of the tools I just mentioned now, but also an increasing focus on specific technologies and specific modeling structures. For example, Ralph Kimball's star schema, the Inman EDW methodology, and both things that are happening at a database level, business process level, and a visualization level. And you saw a huge number of new startups and new companies be created around that time that came into being. And then what happened? So as we see in any information technology, or for that matter, any industrial technology evolution, just as in the United States, there used to be about 400 car manufacturers in the early 20th century. And then that consolidated down to 3 major car manufacturers and a couple of other secondary specialist manufacturers. We saw the same thing happen in the business intelligence space, where Those was acquired by IBM, Business Objects was acquired by SAP, Siebel was acquired by Oracle, and then even most recently, we saw Tableau was acquired by Salesforce for a lot of money. So between the early to mid 2000s and now at this point in time in 2019, what we have seen is the new entrants come into the market on innovation. They develop the market, they compete with each other to bring new features and get the market excited. And once they reach, the products reach a certain point in their life cycle, they get acquired by bigger, more enterprise players who can create new markets, who can offer up these offerings as a part of a enterprise solution. And the reason I go into a bit of a history on this is because I think that's exactly what we are seeing with data science right now. So you're seeing people like my former employer, H2O, which has been rated very highly as one of the most innovative data science companies in the world. You're seeing the likes of Data Robots, which has got also a very good brand name and a good following. Both companies have raised a lot of money in their Series D and Series E in the market. And you're also seeing other players, RapidMiner and Nime and plenty of others. And also you're seeing the older players like SAS, who are also coming up with new capabilities, new products, and new features. So for somebody who has been in the industry for about 15 plus years, I would say that what I see today is very much like what I saw 15 years, 10 years ago in the business intelligence space, with a whole wave of new companies, new products, and new features, and then them creating the market, competing with each other using innovation, and then being acquired by the larger companies. So I would say that data science products and advanced analytics products are pretty much in the same boat right now. The H2Os, the Data Robots, and the others are kind of setting now the market, building innovation more rapidly than an enterprise company can do on its own, which is why I think these companies tend to be the forward-stepping companies in general, because they are specialist companies. They focus on a specific technology or technologies. They focus on doing one thing or two things right, and they don't have the weight of history to prevent them from doing things their own ways. And in the next 5 years, I also see the same consolidation which we saw in the mid 2000s will also happen in the data science world. I don't think the market is quite ready for that consolidation to happen within the next 1 or 2 years. But in the next 3 to 5 years, I definitely see some consolidation happening. And just as everybody uses business intelligence today, in 3 to 5 years' time, I don't think you will see data science and data scientists being separate the way that a business does things. They'll become integral to how a business does things, and you will see that market consolidation, product consolidation, reflecting how important and central AI is going to be to how a business does its work in the future, near future.
So touching on the point that where you say these new entrants, they focus on just doing one or two things well, focus on scaling on those one or two little things. Do you think that's the key factor that the enterprise customer are choosing to use their product?
Yeah, I mean, I would just a quick note there, Jason. I would say it's not one or two little things, it's one or two big things which they are doing. Because I think the areas that these companies are picking up to focus on, which is data science, whether in the structured world or the unstructured world, are actually going to drive how information is mostly going to be managed and consumed in the next few years. It is not, and again, you don't have to go by what I say. People who are far more intelligent than me, like Bill Gates and several other technology giants, Sundar Pichai and others, believe that AI is going to be the next wave of lasting technology transformation and technology innovation. And I agree with them. So what these companies are doing is picking up specific areas, whether it is auto ML or it is structured data analytics or it's unstructured data analytics, or it's an easier way of productionizing predictive models and so on and so forth. And they're doing it well. And to answer your question about are enterprises picking up on these tools, I think the answer is a resounding yes. I can't speak for others because I don't know them as well as H2O, which is where I used to work before coming to Deloitte. And I would say that the significant organizations in the United States, whether it was in financial services or telecom, were using H2O products to drive multiple areas of their business, whether it was customer experience, it was operations management, anomaly detection, or even ways of building new products and services. Knowing a bit that I do about some of the others, in general, I think the rate of enterprise adoption of specialist data science products from the likes of H2O and DataRobot and others is definitely increasing. But I think the numbers and the influence can only increase from here. We are nowhere close to maturation or saturation for at least the next 5 years.
In your view, how can the Australian companies excel in this space to develop products for the rest of the world to use rather than relying on using the product coming out from the state?
This is a very good question. And I think there are already a few Australian companies that are doing very well in terms of establishing a global brand. Atlassian, for one, being an excellent example of an Australian success story. Canva being another. Two, and there are many more, as both of us know. But I think Australian companies that start in Australia and then go global tend to do, in general, very well for themselves. And I think Australia as a country tends to punch above its weight in terms of innovation to create new software products and services. But having said that, I think there is definitely also room for more and there is room for improvement. And what I mean by that is one advantage that Australia has is it's not a very small population. It's about 25 million, highly educated, generally speaking, high income country, first world buying and spending patterns and organizational behaviors. So I think those are all that Australian startups and Australian organizations can take advantage of. Now, having said that, notwithstanding the likes of the Atlassian and the Canvas of the world, I think with so many advantages going for it, I think the room for growth for Australian companies is higher. And what I mean by that is things such as the cloud, data platforms, big data, and even machine and deep learning are not evenly spread across Australian businesses. So, for an Australian startup to do well, it's easier, obviously, to start in Australia and build a local market over here and then go global by going to the United States, typically Silicon Valley, where there is a lot more venture capital funding, other places, or New York, if you're in the financial services space, and build from there. The biggest challenge I see for the Australian entrepreneur or the Australian product manager is that the level of advancement, if I can use that word, among the free use of data, the building of data platforms where both structured and unstructured data is available for analytics and data science, and the use of the cloud lag the rest of the first world. And I would say in some cases also lag quite a bit of what we don't call the first world. So if you take a look at India or you take a look at China or some of these other countries, which are not necessarily first world countries, I would say that product companies and startups are doing extremely well in these countries, even though they don't have the average disposable income or the average GDP being as high as it is in Australia. And the reason they are able to do it is because they have adopted the cloud and they've adopted big and little data and everything else in between far more readily and more proactively than the vast majority of Australian businesses have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you think there is anything, or what can the Australian government do to help with this trend of the product development by the Australian company in Australia?
I hesitate. I will answer that question, but I'll answer that question from a couple of perspectives.
Sure.
From the United States, and I'm a huge fan of the United States, Jason, for several things that the US, I think, does exceedingly well. And one of the things it does exceedingly well is it encourages a private ecosystem, whether it is venture capital, whether it is a startup ecosystem, or whether it is building connections between private organizations and universities, for example. That, in my opinion, should be also another way that Australia thinks about in terms of building and sustaining innovation in the short, mid, and long term. Often in Australia, I have heard, and I'm not saying again it's right or wrong, but I've often heard people say, oh, what can government do better to change the innovation landscape? Government can certainly do some things better, right? So I think, for example, building an education system, an advanced education system which supports tomorrow's educational needs, not just at the university level, but starting from primary school, going through middle school, high school, all the way up to universities, is something that the government must absolutely encourage. If I believe there is a role for government to play, I believe that role is first and foremost starts with the education system. If you take a look at what is happening in the AI space, and let's just focus on two countries, right? Let's take a look at the United States and let's take a look at Canada. In both the United States and Canada, one of the reasons the Silicon Valley is the Silicon Valley is because in the 1970s, initially most of the software development, the old school companies whether it was IBM or others, were all based actually not in the Silicon Valley. They were all mostly based on the East Coast. And they were based in New York and Boston and places like that. And then what you saw was an investment by not so much government, but by educational institutions, specifically Stanford, University of California in Berkeley, and the numerous other universities in the San Francisco Bay Area that started essentially creating computer science graduates and started creating engineers in order for people to be able to sustain a business. So it is no accident that whether it was Hewlett Packard or Apple or Xerox, which set up the Palo Alto Research Center, and then later on the Oracles of the world, they all started in the Silicon Valley or around the Silicon Valley primarily because the education system was there. Now, you can also say the same thing is happening with Toronto today. If you take a look at what is happening in Canada, a lot of, I wouldn't say it's still the same scale as the Silicon Valley or the US, but Toronto is increasingly picking up quite a few new AI startups. And the reason they are able to do that is because, again, a combination of universities and funding, whether it's Toronto or Vancouver and places like that. So the role of government has to be in creating the educational system, starting from class 1 or grade 1, and not just the university education system. So I think that's the first thing that has to happen. The second thing that has to happen is, I believe that for innovation to truly succeed, innovation cannot be regulated. I've had multiple conversations with my good friend, Nicholas Gruen, who is considered to be widely Australia's number one public intellectual economic genius and somebody who has done more for the cause of innovation in Australia than I think any other living person today. And Nicholas and I have had more than one conversation on the role of government and innovation. And my opinion, which I've been very open about, is innovation can't be a bottom-down regulated space. It has to have government support, but businesses and individuals must see rewards in innovating, must not be punished for failures, and must be encouraged for taking risk.
Absolutely, I agree. And that is probably the fundamental, the policy and the role that the government can play. Now, I feel like a lot of the answer are the way that you are looking at things. You often really look at all these things as much as it's AI or analytic business. I feel like you often really look into this thing from the human lens rather than just like we're gonna use analytics to solve the world's hunger, but you have a lot of perspective from the human lens and bridging together that human lens and the technology to solve the problem. Do you think that is because of your academic training that helps you to look this way? And for anyone who wants to be able to do that and step up and say, that is how we should approach to solve the problem, what do you think they should do in order to have that sort of angle that you have?
So thank you for asking that question. And I think some of the way I think certainly has to do with my academic background, because Jason, as you know, I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. I have a master's degree in linguistics and liberal arts, and I did a PhD coursework, which I started but didn't finish, on bringing together technology and the cognitive/human experience. So I have been not just a student of the history of technology, but I have also been involved in the last decade or so in running several innovation programs in the Silicon Valley and also here in Australia in the last year or so that I've been here, that looks at technology. Technology is not something that is new. Humans have always been looking to use technology since the days of the wheel to make their life easier, to make our lives more comfortable, to make our lives more satisfying, to improve empathy, to improve collaboration, and most importantly, to make us happy. So, if we take a look at the history of technology, the wheel was a huge technology revolution that caused, in many ways, civilization and transportation to happen. Then there was agriculture and the ability for us to selectively use specific strains or specific mutants and develop those agricultural plant-based mutations that were beneficial to us, led to the development of cities and led to the increase in human population and led to modern civilization. Then fast forward, the development of the printing press in the 15th century by Gutenberg was another technology revolution that caused us to start spreading knowledge. And it took education and knowledge from a small group of people who controlled it and used it for their purposes and created the modern foundations of today's democracies and today's educated societies and really the modern world we live in. Then you move forward to the 18th and 19th century, the invention of the steam engine and the invention of the automobile caused new personal freedoms to happen, caused new ways of doing things. And then finally, the new wave of computing starting from the 50s and the 60s also led to huge improvements in how we do things, not just from an efficiency and a production perspective, but as anybody who uses WhatsApp or Facebook or Instagram or the World Wide Web, or frankly speaking, this communication, this conversation the two of us are having hundreds of kilometers apart, yet we are able to talk in real time, tells us that every technology innovation, every technology revolution has brought about new and improved ways of doing things. In the last 3 to 5 years, there has been a lot of conversation about how artificial intelligence is going to either create the Skynet kind of monster that you saw in Terminator, or it's going to take away jobs. And for the last 4 years, at least, Jason, both in my books and my talks, I have been very clear that I don't see that happening. I don't see AI becoming a threat to humanity. Like every technology revolution that we just spoke about in the last couple of minutes here, I see AI as bringing people more together, creating more happiness, creating new jobs, and creating more empathy and more collaboration. Now, in the process of AI happening, will there be some changes in existing jobs? Of course there will be. Just as the automobile came about, there used to be 50,000 horse carriages and 1,000 horses in New York City. And one of the popular jobs was for people who used to clean up the horse shit off the streets of New York. Now, when the automobile came in, the people who were clearing the horse shit lost their jobs. Yes, but it created an industrial revolution that created better, higher paying jobs instead of people who were removing horse manure from the streets of New York. So, the same way, the dawn of AI is going to create new, better, more fulfilling roles for us, and humanity is going to benefit like it has from every technology revolution. I strongly believe that, and I know I will see that in my lifetime.
I agree. It will certainly create a new range of jobs. And you have worked as a leader for a long time. What are the important attributes you personally strive for to become a good leader?
The first, I think, is empathy. That, in my opinion, is underrated. But empathy for your colleagues, empathy for your clients and your customers. They are the people who pay the bills. They are the people whose needs is higher than our own. And empathy for the various stakeholders, whether it's people in business, people in technology, people in support. I think the most important quality for a leader is empathy, because with empathy comes a higher understanding of one's own purpose and one's own manner and behavior and communications that leads one to do the right thing by your clients, by your colleagues, and by extension to society. The first thing is empathy. The second thing is clear and effective communication, and that is both verbal communication and written communication. A leader who cannot communicate effectively is a leader who is not effective, period. And communication can be learned and it can be practiced, and we all can be better communicators. Great leaders have been invariably at least good communicators, if not great communicators. The third thing is working within an organization in a collaborative mindset, which means that while you should be certainly interested in your role and in your team's success and your team's role, we should not forget that a rising tide raises all ships, which means that we can't just do it all by ourselves, or our team can't do it by ourselves. In the true sense of working in an organization, you have to bring the business, technology, and the various other parts together in order to meet or exceed a customer satisfaction every single time. And finally, great leaders focus on the most important persons in their professional lives, which is the customer. Every interaction that a good leader must do must be focused on, is it resulting in a happy customer? And if that interaction is not resulting in a happy customer, one must really step back and look at oneself and fix that to create a happy customer every chance that person has.
You are a busy man, and how do you still manage to find time to write? And what would be your advice to those leaders who are thinking about writing their first book?
I wouldn't recommend it.
Why is that?
Because writing is not just a personal labor of love, it is also because it takes a lot out, frankly. So, in addition to doing my day job, and I do more than a day job typically to keep my clients happy and to keep my company happy. Anytime that you want to write or you want to do something like that, it always comes out of your personal time. So, the first thing I would say is make sure you have a supportive partner, you have supportive children, you have supportive family members, parents, siblings, so that they give you permission to take the time out to do your writing, frankly. So I think the ability to contribute more than what we do in our jobs comes out of essentially the ability to sacrifice a lot of your personal time to accomplish what you want to do.
Are you currently writing a new book? If so, would you like to give us a sneak peek of this new book?
Thank you, Jason. This is why I love talking to you. Very timely question also. My co-authors, all of whom are experts in the field of data science and AI, in Kirk Bone, Bob Rogers, Ed Dixon, Christensen, and Diane Bleck, and a couple of others who are coming on board, and I are writing a new book called Demystifying Artificial Intelligence for the Enterprise. It's going to be published by Taylor and Francis of UK, and it will be coming out at the beginning of next year. We are going through chapters on what is AI, how do we define it, moving into strategic approaches of how to deploy AI in an enterprise, looking at AI along those 5 pillars: supply chain, customer engagement, HR and talent, financial, and so on and so forth. And then wrapping up with best practices and case studies on how AI can be put to use in any organization and how organizations can succeed with it.
Great. I'm looking forward to this book. So I always end my interview with this one question. What is one book that you would give it to your younger self that could fast track in transforming yourself? And why is that?
The one book that I still refer to after so many years after reading it is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie, yep.
And I think Carnegie's book is a classic. And it again, to your earlier point, in the end, a lot of what we do is about human relations and using technology to drive a better human experience.
Agreed.
And Dale talks a lot about not technology at all, but the human to human interaction, which is going to be all the more important in the age of AI.
Great. I have loved that book and I probably read that 10 times already. Prashant, I cannot thank you enough for being coming on the guest for ourselves, and has been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity, Jason. You are a great interviewer, and I can say that I loved every question and every minute of this conversation, and I'm eagerly looking forward to future episodes of your podcast.